Assalamu alaikum and good evening to our listening audience. This is Professor Aminah Al-Deen with Critical Talk, which is a production of Sound Vision. This is a very special occasion for me um, in that we're talking this evening about Uyghur Muslims. Somehow or the other, they have gotten off the front page news, back page news, and given all of the other recent events, they've gotten off some of our minds. With me this evening, I have Dr. Henryk Szadziewski, and I hope I pronounced that right because I'm so excited that he is here with us this evening. And he is a serious specialist. Welcome to Critical Talk. He is the director of research at the Uyghur. Can you put that back up for me? At the Uyghur Institute. And hopefully we will, let me pull this up. Um, and I've never, you're going to tell us something about this. Um, Uyghur Human Rights Project. He holds a PhD in geography from the University of Hawaii. And I was drooling at this in Hawaii at Manola. Oh my goodness. And an MSc in economics. And oh, it's just all over the place with his degrees. But he also has spent time in the region. He keeps in contact with people in the region. And he and I are going to explore a little bit. And before, I want to commemorate, today is a very special day. So if you could pull up, and I think it's 1995, 1996, I'm not sure the date, on February 5th, there was a massacre. Dr. Henry, can you tell us a little bit about the massacre while we're using that as our introduction?
Certainly. And first of all, thank you very much, Dr. Aminah, for inviting me on to Critical Talk.
Oh,
It's
my
very,
honor.
very important to us to have this platform. Muslim Network TV is certainly, I know, very much respected, and glad to have this platform and voice. You mentioned the Gulja Massacre, and this occurred in 1997 on February the 5th. And that is, so we're now 27 years on from the massacre. And at the time, what happened was that Uyghurs in the northern city of the Uyghur region initiated a protest. And the protest was prompted by a police crackdown on a burgeoning civil rights or civil society movement in the city of Gulja. The civil society movement was focused on very positive aspects of organizing Uyghur youth in terms of moral education, religious education, and because there'd been an upswing in drug addiction and other social problems at the time. So the Uyghurs proactively they took action and organized their youth in ways that encourage positivity, emphasizing Uyghur identity. The Chinese authorities saw that as a threat to their own organization of Uyghurs and control over Uyghurs, and cracked down on that. The protest that happened on February 5th, 1997 was violently suppressed by Chinese state security forces. And we, at the time, information out of the region was quite scarce to get. So we don't have an exact number of people who were killed in that operation. Nevertheless, the ensuing weeks, the Chinese police then conducted sweeps of neighborhoods. And in the months that followed that massacre, roughly, according to an Amnesty International report that was released in 1999, roughly 200 Uyghurs were executed for their participation in that protest.
Wait a minute. Do we have some video somewhere hiding of what was going on then? Wow.
So
Oh.
what you're seeing here are still shots of the protest in the top left hand corner, and then also you can see a confrontation between security forces in the bottom right there. The quality of these images just demonstrate what kind of information we had coming out of the region at the time. I myself was living in a southern city in Kashgar at this time from 1994 to 97. So very little was known about the kinds of issues that Uyghurs were facing in the region. But also this tight lid on information was very much evident at this time. There was the way that we learned about this protest. I mean, I was in the region myself, and I didn't know that it was happening. I noticed an upswing in security and a number of security checks that were happening in the city of Kashgar, where I was living. However, some of these leaked images and a small segment of video, it was leaked to the UK Channel 4 News, who did a short segment on the protest.
You know, it's amazing. You get very little, if anything, in the quote unquote freest country in the world, namely the United States of America. But nevertheless, I think it's important for us to take a moment to commemorate, um, celebrate the intention of the people who lost their lives, and I'm sure subsequently lost their houses and all kinds of, if they had privileges. So if we could just take a moment. I think one of the things that many of us around the world, it's not a Western phenomena, do is we hear about this massacre, that massacre, you know, this almost genocide. I don't know quite how one has an almost genocide, but and we do a kind of do chain, you know, and may Allah give. Look at the best of all the Muslims who have died, and then we're finished. But the Muslims that are left behind aren't quite finished. And the Uyghur, I remember teaching it in one of my classes on Islamic global cultures. Nobody had ever heard of them. They hadn't even heard that there were Muslims in China. So I'm going to prevail upon your awesome bank of knowledge. Who are the Uyghur? If you could pull up a map for me so that our audience can see where they live. I know it's western. I don't know if it's quite. It's northwestern region of China. Um, so we can be clear of where you're the better geographer by far than I'll ever be. Uh, where they are, I know they're sitting on oil and gas reserves, which everybody wants, right? Uh, and that, if nothing else, is enough to get them on the same page as you. But let's see where the Uyghur live and give us a little bit of an history of who are they. Some say Turks, some say their ancestors were Mongolian, some people talk about the uh, uh, I guess the intermarry between them and Iranians. I mean, there are all kinds of things floating around, and it could be all of those things. But can you help us out here? Miriam, can you pull it up? I need a map. You're on, Professor Henryk.
Thank you. And I think that this is such an important question because it does come up quite often. Who are the Uyghur and where are they? So I think, beginning with the people themselves, the history of the Uyghurs goes back 4,000 years, and the early Uyghurs were practitioners of Manichaeism and Buddhism, and around about in the 10th century, in the Common Era, is when the Uyghurs converted to Islam, and that has been one of the most defining aspects of their identity. And throughout since that time, the region itself has experienced a number of conflicts and a number of transfers of power and localized centers of power. And a lot of the power was centered around oases. Although this is what you have here is a political map of East Turkestan, the core of the south of that region is covered by a desert called the Taklamakan. And around that desert were a number of oases that were very key to life for Uyghurs. And Kashgar was in the far west. It's a city, if you look at the borders of Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Tajikistan, it's in that corner of the region. Gulja, which we mentioned earlier, to the north and closer to Kazakhstan towards the border there. Khotan in the south. And so a lot of these centers had their own regional centers of power throughout the earlier period of Uyghur history. Uyghurs themselves were famously part of the Silk Road. So they have a long tradition of global flows of information, of ideas, and all other kinds of influences, linguistic and people who came through. And all of that has shaped this very, very unique and very special culture, which of course Uyghurs themselves have been very much determined to hold on to, and certainly have contributed to the world's store of knowledge. Kashgar, the city I lived in, as I mentioned earlier, was a center of religious learning. Philosophers, mathematicians, and also people who were educational reformers. So these were settled peoples. These were oases peoples. They were intellectuals, farmers, and educators. So these were a group that also, when the Mongol Empire under Chinggis Khan, or popularly known as Genghis Khan, when he came through the region, the Uyghurs provided the early writing system for the Mongol Empire. So this was a literate and a very much a knowledge-based society. And they're considered a Turkic people, and they share affinities with a lot of Central Asian, their brothers and sisters across the borders in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and also somewhat in Tajikistan. There's a group in the south of Tajiks who have affinities there. One thing to note: the reason why we have a space called East Turkestan is because it's supposed to reflect a sort of non-ethnic dominance of the Uyghur people, because they're in the north of the region. There are a number of Kazakhs who live across the border from Kazakhstan. There are also Uzbeks and Tatar and Kyrgyz as well. So the name of East Turkestan came up as a way not to sort of give the Uyghurs this dominance over this particular region. In modern history, if we think about maybe from the 20th century onwards, Uyghurs had two very brief periods of independence. The foundation of a republic in Kashgar in 1933, and then another in 1944 with the center in Gulja in the north. In 49 is when the Chinese Communist People's Liberation Army entered the region. And so you had this loss of the independence and the offer from the Chinese Communist Party of autonomy. I can go on further into the sort of modern Chinese Communist Party region, but I'll give you an opportunity
And
to
I'm going
digest.
to ask my producers to have you back because I think, especially for those of us living in the United States, we have zero, or maybe I could say minus 100 pieces of information just about the region. We don't understand the interactions of peoples. Um, and therefore, when a crisis arises, we have who, is the favorite question. Like, well, who are you talking about? And the Uyghur really got on the map. For many of us through Sound Vision, when it started publicizing information about Uyghur Muslims and the Chinese were going to do something to somebody, and they said, "Well, who aren't they Muslim Chinese? Aren't they? Why aren't they just Muslim Chinese?" And that comes from again an ignorance about who are the Muslims who live in China. Why are these Muslims different?
Mhm. Yes, the you will find mosques and mosques that have been there for centuries in the capital of Beijing. Those mosques are predominantly for Hui Muslims who are ethnically considered Han or Chinese, who were converted by early Arab traders in China. But there are Muslims in Tibet, for example, and across other provinces and regions in China who have been there for some time. And as I mentioned, many of the groups from Kazakhs and Kyrgyz to Uzbek and of course the Uyghur are also Muslims. And I think that when I first expressed an interest in the region, this was in 1990, and I talked about going to the Uyghur region and the region being a predominantly Muslim space. Many people were surprised that there would be
Yeah,
Muslims in China.
yeah. I learned about it from he just recently died. A buddy of mine, a colleague rather, who was in California, who wrote several books on Chinese Muslims, and he was mentioning the Uyghur. You can get enchanted, but you really need to know.
Mm.
So I'm going to take a quick break here, but I would like for you to think about when, no, give me the infrastructure of the region and why this intensified interest on the part of the majority Han Chinese
Mhm.
about they just, what is this Uyghur fight for independence? Is that what got their haunches up? What is going on here? Before we get to the building of these detention camps that I watched on this BBC program yesterday, we'll be back. This is Professor Aminah Al-Deen with Professor Shah Jeffsky. I almost got it. Um, and we'll be right back. We're talking about Uyghur Muslims, and you should be too. Assalamu alaikum and good evening. This is Professor Aminah Al-Deen, and I'm having, oh man, it's so informative. It's a shame I'm not younger and could write faster. I'm taking so many notes here on Uyghur Muslims. We have not talked about them in quite a while at Sound Vision, although Muslim News keeps up with what, whoops, I'm on mute. Um, with what is happening. We need to really get some information into our listening and viewing audience's head. And Dr. Henryk is just the person, except he's in class and he's lecturing, and I can't write fast enough. This is a sound critical talk is the production of Sound Vision. Hopefully, Dr. Henryk knows because I will be calling on him again. Um, I threw a bunch of questions at you. You can take them in any order that you wish.
Yeah, I think one of the first questions you asked was about the infrastructure and the perhaps the physical geography of the region
Mm-hmm.
and why that might be attractive to the Chinese state.
Right.
Well, first of all, in terms of the physical geography, I talked about the deserts and that there are also three major mountain chains right across the region. But what's really, really important here is oil and gas. And natural gas, there are reserves in the Uyghur region and also oil reserves. But it is also adjacent to a number of states that can also provide natural gas and oil requirements and import them to the Chinese state. The Chinese state, as you know, is very much on the global hunt for these natural resources to fuel and fund
So,
its.
so it's not only the Chinese that want to. We want to. America wants to bump out the Chinese, so it can get them. So stop having to get them from the Middle East.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the theories out there. I would think that what China is doing in the region is certainly focused on its own energy needs, and they have done a number of deals with authorities in Kazakhstan and also Uzbekistan to access their natural resources. That's a key reason. There,
Mhm.
and then the other, you talked about what's the interest. And I think that it really cuts into sort of three major, well, there's a political reason that I won't go into net, but we can talk about. But there's the economic side, which of course there are these natural resources which are of interest, or the access to
Mhm.
natural resources, which is also important. But it's also a conduit in terms of the outward-facing Chinese state into the Eurasian landmass. So out into towards Europe, but also into South Asia and into the Middle East and Africa. It is very critical in that economic plan. In 2013, the Chinese Party Secretary Xi Jinping announced the Belt and Road Initiative, which many of us have heard about. And the idea of that initially was to sort of establish these trade routes and to rewire trade and economic financing through China. And Uyghur region was critical to this particular project. And as you can see from the map here, it's the positioning of East Turkestan, where you have this corridor in the disputed region of Kashmir, of course, but Pakistan border against in East Turkestan. That is a conduit down into the Arabian Sea. And there's a port development that the Chinese have built in Pakistan. Also out towards Europe, across the Eurasian landmass as well. So it's this window out onto the west. That is a very important part of the Belt and Roads. Not only there are economic aspects to that policy, but there's a strategic one too. So control of the Central Asian region and Eurasia. That constitutes one of three major reasons why the Chinese state is interested in this region. I think the other one is about security. And China has really played this card. And it's the probable origin of a number of the terrible things that we hear coming out of the Uyghur region at this time. The security piece, I think, is because the region in history has been contested. It hasn't always been firmly under the Chinese state's control. And the Uyghurs have had, as I said, two moments of independence in modern times. And I think that there is a idea about filling China to its borders. And the securitization piece has been very much engaged with these, with brutal policies of course, policing, but also surveillance. And within China's case, the deployment of some of the latest surveillance technologies out there. So it's territorialization of the region, a region that they never felt quite comfortable in, never quite fully in control in. And now the expansion and the sort of security of keeping that region under its control. So those are two parts.
Keeping it in security, like some of the technological stuff that they're using from, what is it, face manipulation or imaging, and being able to track you in a car or figure out what ethnic group you belong to, because many of us only have Mao's understanding of the Cultural Revolution as bringing all the people under one umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
So the current person is trying to do the same thing, not calling it a cultural revolution, but perhaps securitization.
Mm. Yeah, there have been successive waves of quite brutal repression. You brought up the Cultural Revolution. It was devastating to the region. The Cultural Revolution was primarily about, of course, there was political control and political motives, but some of the outcome of that was destruction of mosques. Particularly, we're talking about the Uyghur region, persecution of imams and female religious leaders, and to the extent where pigs were kept in mosques. It was this kind of humiliation. It wasn't just destruction, but it was a deliberate humiliation of the religion itself. Now, we're now in a new wave of extreme repression. And this one is very much, as you say, Dr. Aminah.
Okay, but slowly lead us through that. So when we leave this class this evening, we got at least a little piece of it right.
Absolutely. So this what's happened since 2017 here is that we are witnessing China's application of some of the most advanced surveillance technologies on the planet. It has been used to repress Uyghurs to the point where the UN itself has produced a report that says that these actions could possibly amount to crimes against humanity. Now, the surveillance technology is absolutely, as you said, there's facial recognition technology, which not only can identify the person's ethnicity, but also the identity of the individual themselves. As you say, driving in your car or walking down the street, these are all pervasive, and they're picking up where you are and what you're doing. The surveillance technology also extends to other pieces too, in very intrusive in terms of your privacy. So your activity, for example, if you're using electricity at 2 a.m., they'll want to know why. Are you doing something suspicious? You should be asleep. Anything sort of out of the ordinary in that kind of in that kind of environment is sent to this IJOP.
Wait a minute. What is out of the ordinary? I decide I want to watch a late night movie.
Absolutely, but for you and I think that we would expect that we would have the freedom to do that without putting ourselves under fear of suspicion. But the Chinese authorities that indicates that you may be involved in some sort of plotting or some sort of secret activity, because who does something at 2 a.m. in their mind? And I think it's that level of securitization. And so that's one level, this highly technological aspect of it. And the other aspect of this is quite pernicious, is that this is seen as the laboratory. This is where this technology gets tested out. So all of those cameras we're talking about, the high vision, the Dahua, who are heavily implicated in picking up facial recognition technology, and also picking up Uyghurs as they just go about their daily lives. That technology, you can go on Amazon right now and you can find cameras to buy and be in your home within a week or a day, depending where you are. Those are the same companies who have done this kinds of surveillance technology in the Uyghur region.
Oh, what am I looking at here?
So here, this is so I talked about the surveillance piece. There's another important part to the surveillance regime that's currently in place in the Uyghur region, and that's a very human-centered one. So when you're in a environment, as we may be familiar with this, where you can't trust each other, where it's incentivized to report on your neighbor, incentivized or de-incentivized, in the sense that if you don't tell me something bad is going to happen to you, your family. Right. That human aspect just creates, well, obviously it breaks down communities and the trust between them. But what you're seeing here on the left here, and you can see the Chinese individual sitting behind some books, is part of what was called the Becoming Family program. The Chinese state sent a vast number of party cadres into the homes of Uyghurs. And it could be, they sent them into the homes of Uyghurs for, they could be as long as a week or maybe longer. They would sleep in the homes, sometimes sleep in the same beds as yes. It's almost beyond belief. Yeah. And they called it Becoming Family. And in that image on the left, you see a child. So what some of these Becoming Family cadres would do as they would enter the home, they would stay there and they would ask the children questions such as, does your father smoke? Does your father drink alcohol? Do your parents pray? Do you pray? And they wouldn't directly ask the parents, but they would ask the children, who themselves, of course, are innocent, and they don't, they can't protect themselves against this kind of individuals. But there's some very much darker sides to this program too, that some of these officials who were placed into Uyghur homes, and of course they had no choice, is that there are some quite credible allegations of sexual misconduct of these individuals while they were there, abusing their power. And so it was a very one of the things that you think about is your home, is that it's inviolable, but this space belonged to the state and could be, and that line could be crossed.
Wait a minute. So the government could actually send government robots into your home. Who vets these people that they're sending? They could be nefarious people, there to chase your daughter or your wife or, whatever. So the government calls itself vetting them. They could send them into your home for an indefinite amount of time to peek and see and get in your bed. I mean, how such an invasion of intimacies for any what does that say? I can't see it. Where's the Uyghur host?
So these are images, as you can see, of Chinese cadres who have been told to go into these homes and make themselves welcome, I guess. And you can see on the right here, they're obviously in a very intimate situation with children. And on the left here,
is the guest.
pardon me.
The woman with the glasses is the guest.
Correct.
Oh my goodness. I mean, you know, we here are at the other tip of that with these laws, the censure laws, and the this, not even understanding where it could go.
Hmm.
I'm undone. Keep talking.
Well, I mean, it demonstrates the way in which there are no limits to what the state can do. So there's no form of redress. You might be able to, you know, in any normal society, you would be able to, even if there wasn't any sort of route through any kind of formal legal channel, you would still be able to go on the street and protest and say, no, this is not
You
acceptable.
can't do that in America either
Exactly. So anymore, right? And I think that this is part of that closure of civil society space to push back and say, no, this is just not acceptable. And the other very, I guess, the most chilling aspect of this is that this was occurring at a time when large numbers of men were being rounded up and put into internment camps, leaving, not always, because a large number of women were also sent to camps, but leaving families particularly vulnerable, children, wives, grandparents. And so it was also done at a time which made these families vulnerable to.
I thought there were a few things that could shock me, but this doesn't. I mean, and anybody watching, it has to move you. Um, where if we don't let or get out or know what's happening there, that it could happen next to you. Um, we just got to do just a little more than acknowledge and pray for. We can speak at the moment. Don't know what will happen. Excuse me for coughing next year, but this is leading up to this. Um, what I was watching at the BBC had a series that it did on the Silk Road. Um, and in that, they do a little, you know, the BBC way of the Uyghur. And after I got through being bad, oh man, just wowed by the fabric, uh, this young man who's at a school here in the United States had done some error. I mean, he was on his computer looking up all of this stuff because he needed some analytics about, you know, the number of camps, where are they? They were built very, very quickly, trying to get hidden cameras inside of schools. So we went from the surveillance that began just like a trek down Alice in Wonderland's journey, you know? And so, can you begin? And I'm really going to get my producers to put up as many pictures as possible. But I want you to take us up to where we are now.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm glad that we've spent some time to think about the context, right? Because it's super important, right, to get there. You know, this has been a gradual process of dehumanization, so that when we get to the point of 2017, where these crimes against humanity start to occur, the Uyghurs have been dehumanized. These things that are happening to them are happening because this is who they are. And I think that it was an ongoing process. So where we are right now is so for 2017, roughly 1.8 million, and to some estimates, 3 million Uyghurs were put in internment camps. So that is a vast infrastructure. There are approximately 12 million Uyghurs in the region. So you're talking almost a quarter of the population in internment camps. This is extrajudicial detention. Now, the Chinese government, first of all, denied these camps existed, and then once the evidence was produced, they were presented to the world as vocational and educational training camps, meaning that the idea was that we were educating Uyghurs in learning to be productive economic citizens. They had to be tamed from their extremism and their terrorist tendencies.
Yeah.
There you go, exactly.
Thanks.
And this was a humane way of doing it, rather than the way that the US and its allies go about bombing different states. So they were very much on the front foot in projecting this kind of this narrative. Nonetheless, what was happening in those camps is quite disturbing, and you have survivors from those camps who talk about the just some of the most awful abuses, sexual abuses by the guards, particularly focused on women, and torture and deaths in these camps. But it was mostly the goal was propaganda and brainwashing, instruction in the Chinese language, but also non-stop propaganda, particularly studying Xi Jinping's speeches.
And keeping you awake so that it really, you're distorted in the brain. But then I saw a picture where they were injecting people so that they would retain this training and brainwashing.
Yeah, I don't think we are only learning as much as we can about what happened at that time. There are allegations, incredible allegations there, of the trial of pharmaceuticals on these internees, and we don't know what happened to, as to the results of these. What are these individuals doing? There were also other ways, forced sterilizations that were occurring of Uyghur women, which formed the basis of the Uyghur tribunal's determination that there was a genocide ongoing, that it met this one particular action met the standards as put out in the Genocide Convention. And particularly...
Say that again?
So the insertion of the forced sterilization of women, it was one of the bases for an independent body that was called the Uyghur Tribunal that convened in London, and it passed a judgment that said that the situation in the Uyghur region is considered a genocide.
Is this the same kind of thing where South Africa took Israel to court on charges of genocide? Did it get to the UN Court of Justice?
It did not. That's because China is not party to it. However, there's some legal experts that do think that there's a pathway through that. What this was this was called a People's Tribunal, and senior legal experts were on the panel who were adjudicating, and they heard, of course, evidence and invited the Chinese authorities to come present their side of the story. Of course, they didn't take that opportunity. However, it is part of this movement where people, the vulnerable, the marginalized, the people who have been essentially just been at the brunt of the state violence, but find no kind of redress in the world, either through the UN process or whatever ways that they may be able to do. So they take their matters into into their own hands and say, we will set up our own tribunal and let's let the world hear the evidence. And this was a very significant moment for Uyghurs.
Oh, I see it. So it had 2, 4, 6, what is that, 7 judges? Mm. Okay, you know what? I'm still digesting what was the name, and I was going to ask my producer to put it in the on the scroll here, the name of those people that come into your house and stay, because I'm going to talk about them some more. If you would spell that out, please.
Yeah, the actual the program was called the Becoming Family.
Becoming Family.
Yes, so a lot of these
don't know.
Right. Yeah. The way, of course, the policies are framed as if it's to your benefit.
I'm going to take another short break. And when we come back, I want you to do a little weighing. Be the Chinese state for a moment. What would you or would you not do, or should you not be allowed to do for the integrity of your state? No state wants to have inside of it a protesting insurgent body, right? What are some of the things that that state can do besides transgressing all human decency, you know? And on the side of the Uyghur, what's going to happen to them if and when they ever get loose of these camps? Because they're living in an open air prison now. But what do you see as the future? This is Professor Aminah Al-Deen. I'm here with Dr. Szadziewski. Oh, I'm gonna have this down pat. I'm having a ball, and I wish the show was 2 hours. I hope we've given enough. But I'm going to ask you, what do you want from us? And we'll be right back. This is Critical Talk for Sound Vision. Assalamu alaikum and good evening. This has been both an informative and a heartrending um, evening, and I'll shed my tears later. I'm ticked off at the Chinese. Um, I guess they can't stop me from coming to China because I'm not going anyway. But um, the extent to states' needs to protect their integrity, whether it's from migrants or from people who've lived there 1,000 or so years. It seems to me that there is a better way of conceiving of doing this stuff other than committing genocide, sterilization, and massacres. What do you think?
Certainly. Before the break, you asked me what are the different routes for the Chinese state here? And I think that their biggest mistake from the outset, of course, there have been several since that, is that it has been a very much a product of a cultural mindset about Uyghurs and particularly non-Chinese peoples within their borders, that they need development, that they need to be brought into some sort of standard of civilization that matches China. And as we talked about,
Some stand they take care of the oil, the gas, and make all that beautiful furniture. They've supplied horses and transportation routes. What do they need civilizing about? I'm
you,
sorry. I'm sorry.
you're absolutely correct. This is a core argument that, look, the argument is that places such as Tibet or East Turkestan were feudal and that they required some sort of bringing into some sort of standard of a socialist present in terms of the ways that the Chinese state thinks about it. But there is a cultural reason behind it. That non-Han Chinese peoples perhaps need this kinds of development. But when we began our conversation, we talked about the oasis cities of the Uyghur region being centers of learning, leading educational theorists, philosophers, mathematicians, scientists. And not only that, these were Uyghur epistemological advances, knowledge that was their own, that is being destroyed in this process of signification. So I think you talked about what things could be done differently. Well, the first thing that went wrong is they did not respect that knowledge, and as a result did not consult with Uyghurs about what their conception of modernization would be like. There was just no input. It was imposed. And when it was imposed, there was resistance. You don't know the medicine that's good for you, so we're going to keep putting it down your throat, and it gets worse and more abusive as time goes on. So if it's as simple as use the holes in the side of your head and listen instead of the hole in the front of your face, which is just talk down to people. I wish it was that simple, of course. On a legalistic approach, China is party to a number of treaties that obligates it. These are international human rights standards that obligates it, and it is increasingly under pressure in the UN. Now, whether the UN has the teeth to push back on this is another question. But there are several ways, and certainly in the standards on religious freedom of expression and belief, the right to assemble and the right to freely communicate. These are all standards that China has acquiesced to in the international system, but its own tactic is
Right.
to re-engineer them into another way. I don't think that there is a great deal here to say other than, first, listen to the Uyghurs rather than impose your sort of idea of modernity on them. Second, apply, you meet your international standards, the things that you are obliged to meet.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm told by my producer that there is a what we can do plan.
Hmm.
Can you put that up, Miriam? And also, I can't see a thing about what it says. Donate. We can sign petitions. We can volunteer or intern. Where can they intern?
They can intern at our organization, the Uyghur Human Rights Project. Our website has a page dedicated to
Oh, I
that
love.
process.
How young are they taking volunteers? High schoolers?
Yeah, we will certainly take high schoolers. Yes.
Okay, follow us. We can definitely do. That's not. I'm sorry to say. I know fighting doesn't make any sense, but contact Congress. We can do that. That we can do and have been doing. Stop. Oh God! Please stop forced labor all over the world. Subscribe to our mailing list. That's an easy no-brainer, folks listening. Let me give you the last moment.
Well, this is just like I said. It's been a real pleasure to speak to your listeners and your viewers. I think that we have lots of work ahead of us, as you can tell from what we've talked about, and also these actions ahead. I want to say one thing. I've been engaged. This is more of a personal note. I've been engaged with the Uyghur issue since 1990, and I'm proud to do so. But you asked a question about the future, and if you are engaged with the Uyghur diaspora, you see that sense of resilience, the fight against these injustices, even again in the toughest of circumstances, when no one is listening, when the US isn't listening, they still keep knocking the door. Or if the UN isn't listening, they still keep knocking their door. They need friends, they need support. So I would encourage you to get involved and help the Uyghurs.
Well, I hope our listening audience has paid attention. Um, I'm nosy and want to learn more, so I will stay in contact with you if you will permit me. And I just can't thank you enough for taking your time to be with us this evening.
Well, Dr. Aminah, it's been my pleasure, and thank you very much for giving this space open to the Uyghur issue.
Yay! Um, this is Professor Aminah Al-Deen with Critical Talk, and I've been speaking with Dr. Henryk Szadziewski, um, who's been teaching me all night how to pronounce his name, which I'm never going to forget now. I don't even have to see it. I got it. And we've been learning a considerable amount about the Uyghur, and we've also learned about that region and its topography and what the Uyghurs sit on, which is another reason why everybody wants to get in that region, and also what the aims of the Chinese government are, and potentially not, I mean, the Chinese government can have its aims, but it cannot be on the brink of a genocide because, in a way, the brainwashing and the sterilizations and the giving people drugs to make them forget who they are and to become someone else is a kind of genocide. Critical Talk will be back with you next Monday. We're not leaving the subject, however. I want to thank Sound Vision for allowing me and my producers to put on this show on a very important topic. Again, this is Dr. Aminah Al-Deen, Critical Talk, Sound Vision, and I hope all of you take into consideration that short list of things we can do. Assalamu alaikum.